A little girl arrives at a U.S. airport with a man claiming to be her adoptive father. But within hours, her story begins to unravel, starting with a K9 dog named Shadow, who senses something no one else does. A forgotten bag, a hidden letter, and a memory too strong to fake led to a shocking truth about identity, motherhood, and the system meant to protect. If stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. This one will stay with you long after it ends. The announcement echoed across Terminal 4 at Kennedy International Airport. A crisp, automated voice cutting through the soft buzz of travelers checking in dragging luggage, murmuring into phones. Final boarding call for Flight 226 to Denver. All remaining passengers, please proceed to Gate 32. Officer Rachel Kim barely looked up from her monitor. Her shift with the Transportation Security Administration had been mostly uneventful so far. A few oversized bottles of lotion, a forgotten pocket knife, an elderly man with 2 laptops in his carry-on, nothing that demanded more than a raised brow and a polite reminder. But then a voice crackled in her earpiece. "Rachel, can you check something by Gate 17? We have a little girl. Alone." Alone. The word landed oddly in her chest. Kids alone in airports usually came with a flurry of prearranged protocols, a gate escort documentation from guardians, unaccompanied minor badges. There was no panic in the dispatcher's tone, just a cautious curiosity. Rachel stood nodded at her partner to cover the monitor and made her way past the security lanes toward the cluster of seats near Gate 17. What she saw stopped her in her tracks for a beat. A girl couldn't have been older than 8, sat on the edge of a molded plastic chair, tiny sneakers swinging above the floor, a stiff-looking roller bag beside her. She wore a soft blue hoodie with a faded unicorn print, the sleeves pulled over small hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her hair, light brown and neatly braided, framed a pale, unreadable face. No phone, no iPad, no signs of nervousness. Just quiet waiting. "Hi, sweetheart," Rachel said, crouching down, her voice calm, practiced. "My name's Rachel. I work with the airport. Are you here with someone?" The girl looked up. Her eyes were strikingly clear, gray, almost glassy. "I'm flying to Denver," she said without hesitation. "My dad dropped me off." "Okay," Rachel nodded. "What's your name?" "Sophie Lang." The words came evenly, not rehearsed, but too calm, too crisp. Something was off. Rachel reached for her tablet and keyed in the name, cross-checking it with the manifest for Flight 226. There she was, Lang Sophie. Ticket purchased the previous day. Unaccompanied minor box unchecked. That was odd. "Do you have your ID?" Sophie silently reached into the front pocket of her hoodie and handed over a small envelope. Inside, a printed e-ticket, a photocopy of a birth certificate, and a notarized letter supposedly from her father stating he had arranged for his daughter to fly alone. All documents looked clean. Rachel's training told her this should be a standard welfare check, but her gut told her otherwise. She glanced toward the patrol K9 unit a few yards away. Shadow, a black German shepherd with a muscular frame and controlled posture, was weaving through the crowd under the guidance of Officer Decker. "Mind if I borrow your pup?" Rachel asked. Decker raised an eyebrow but nodded. Shadow had been trained in detection for narcotics, firearms, and high-alert emotional distress cases. He rarely reacted unless something was wrong. The moment they approached Sophie, Shadow's ears twitched. Then he slowed, nostrils flaring. His body stiffened. Not aggressive alert, very alert. Rachel stopped walking. "Hey, easy," she whispered, tugging his leash gently. Shadow let out a low, barely audible whine, then sat eyes locked on the girl. Sophie looked back at him, not afraid but deeply focused, unblinking. "Do you like dogs?" Rachel asked. Sophie didn't respond right away. Then, "He smells like someone I knew." The phrasing caught Rachel off guard. "Someone you knew?" "Yeah." Sophie turned her gaze away. "A long time ago." The answer made no sense for a child this young. Decker walked over. "That's not a usual reaction from Shadow," he said low. "No alerts, but he's watching her, like he's waiting for something." Rachel nodded. Her pulse quickened. "Can you check if there's any flagged history on the name Sophie Lang?" "Already on it," Decker said, pulling out his phone. Shadow hadn't moved. The dog remained perfectly still like a statue, eyes steady, ears tilted slightly forward. Rachel crouched again, lowering herself to Sophie's level. "Is your dad picking you up in Denver?" He said someone would. Sophie replied. "I don't know who. No child should say that so flatly." Rachel stood. "I think we need to do a deeper check," she said to Decker. "Not an emergency, but I'm flagging this for special review." Agreed. As Rachel turned to call for a supervisor, she looked back and caught a glimpse of Sophie placing her hand gently on Shadow's head. Just for a second. Shadow didn't flinch, didn't pull away. His tail moved once, then stilled. Rachel swallowed hard. Something wasn't right. And they'd just stepped into it. Officer Rachel Kim leaned slightly over the desk in the back operations room as the monitor refreshed. The system blinked a brief confirmation passenger drop-off ID Martin Lang. Security footage available. Timestamp 09:16 a.m. Rachel clicked into it. The feed showed a tall man in a navy jacket walking briskly through the terminal holding Sophie's hand. At 09:21 he stopped near gate 17, crouched briefly beside her, then stood turned and walked away. No goodbye hug, no looking back. Just gone. She paused the footage and zoomed in. Martin Lang's facial recognition check was already running. Rachel's supervisor, Lieutenant Enrique Alvarez, stood nearby, arms folded. He didn't even escort her to the gate, Rachel said almost to herself, and didn't request unaccompanied minor support. No flagged alerts on the girl, but the whole thing feels rehearsed. Alvarez nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll run his ID through DHS and ICE, just in case. Maybe he's clean. Maybe he isn't. But it doesn't sit right." Outside the glass wall, Sophie sat silently in the soft interview booth, sketching something on the corner of her boarding pass with a hotel pen. Shadow lay at her feet, still unnaturally alert. Head raised, body coiled. Rachel stepped back into the booth. "Sophie, can I ask you something?" The girl looked up. "Did your dad tell you who's picking you up in Denver?" "No," she replied simply. "He said a family friend. Do you know their name?" He didn't say. "Do you know how to reach your dad now?" She shook her head. Rachel tried a softer tone. "Did he say why he couldn't go with you?" Work, Sophie answered, but there was a pause. Small, almost invisible. Rachel made note of it. "And you're sure your name is Sophie Lang?" "Yes. Do you have any other names?" Sophie blinked. "No, just Sophie." Rachel watched her carefully, then exited again. A new alert popped up on the screen. Alvarez read it aloud. Martin Lang left the airport by rideshare at 09:27. Solo passenger. Dropped off downtown Brooklyn. Fake phone number used on booking. Rachel's mouth tightened, so he walked her in, left her sitting alone, and disappeared without a working contact number. Alvarez looked at her. "We're escalating this." But there's more. Border Protection just radioed. A woman was detained at Checkpoint C for mismatched paperwork. No contraband, but no visa match. They were about to process her for a routine denial and return flight. "Why are we involved?" Rachel asked. "Because," he hesitated, glancing at the monitor. Shadow reacted when she passed through customs. It was immediate. He nearly pulled the leash from Decker's grip. Rachel blinked, reacted, a full alert posture, not a hit, but like he picked up on something else. Shadow wasn't trained to detect forged IDs, she said slowly. Or unauthorized travelers. "Exactly," Alvarez said. "That's why it's strange." The footage from Checkpoint C began to play. A woman mid-30s, thin, wearing a gray crewneck and jeans, was escorted by two officers into the holding room. She looked tense, but not aggressive. Her dark brown hair was tied back, loosely, strands falling over her face. When she walked past Shadow, he stopped, pulled hard toward her, and gave a short, deep bark. Not aggression. Not excitement. Something sharper. Focused. "That woman," Rachel said slowly, watching the screen. "Do we have her name?" "She gave it as Maya Thompson," Alvarez replied. "No records on file matching fingerprints. But we found a partial match with an asylum application from 5 years ago under a different name. One that was closed as abandoned." Rachel's eyes narrowed. What if she's not a stranger? What if she knows Sophie? There's no mention of a child in her file, Alvarez countered. No birth certificates, no custody papers, nothing connects them directly. Rachel turned toward the hallway. Let me talk to her. Alvarez hesitated. She lawyered up, said she wouldn't speak until someone checks on her daughter. Used those exact words. Rachel stopped. Her daughter. She turned, slowly facing the glass again. Sophie still sat in the interview booth, drawing on the back of her boarding pass. Shadow hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on the hallway. Rachel stepped back inside. Sophie, she said gently, have you seen that dog before today? The girl hesitated. I think so. Maybe once, when Sophie pressed her lips together. A long time ago, when I was with my mom. Where's your mom now? A pause. Then, I don't know. Rachel nodded, heart hammering. She glanced at Shadow. The dog was upright now, ears pinned, body rigid. His nose tilted slightly towards the hallway as if anticipating something. A second later, the door at the far end opened. 2 officers passed by with the woman from Checkpoint C between them. She looked dazed, confused. Then, just for a moment, she saw the booth. Her steps faltered. Sophie, still sketching, froze. Her pencil slipped. Rachel watched her. No panic, no sudden smile, just a stillness that gripped her entire body. Is that your mom? Rachel asked quietly. Sophie didn't look up. I don't know, she whispered. I'm not supposed to say. Rachel stared through the glass. The woman was already being turned down a different corridor, but Shadow barked sharply once. The kind of bark that demanded attention, not obedience. Rachel had never seen him like this. Sophie's fingers trembled. The sketch she had been making lines and loops on the back of her boarding pass was no longer random. It was a woman's face, eyes familiar, hair swept back. The likeness was undeniable. The caption underneath Mom. Rachel said nothing, but she knew, Shadow did too, and they had just crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. Rachel sat at her desk, the document scanner humming softly beside her as she fed Sophie Lang's papers through one by one. The birth certificate bore a seal from the state of Colorado issued 3 months ago. Not a copy, not an older certificate, a freshly printed document with no visible wear, no signs of long-term use. The mother's name field was typed unknown, while the father's name read Martin Lang, the same name that had shown up on the manifest. The signature of the notary appeared legitimate, but the office address linked to a UPS store in Denver. She double-checked the ID. Sophie had provided a passport issued 4 weeks earlier. The photo was recent, professionally taken, evenly lit against a perfect white background. It wasn't impossible, but it was too clean, too timely. For a child, supposedly flying alone, allegedly under the supervision of a man who had now disappeared from the system, it didn't sit right. Rachel turned the documents over in her hands. They had the right stamps, the right formatting, the right sequencing, but they were assembled like props, as if someone had planned a presentation and made sure every edge was straight. She stood and headed back toward the small holding room where Sophie sat still, scribbling on the now crumpled boarding pass. Shadow remained beside her occasionally, glancing toward the corridor like he expected someone to return. As Rachel approached the door to the hallway, creaked open again and distant voices spilled through. 2 agents were speaking firmly somewhere out of sight. One of the voices, lower, rougher, belonged to the woman from earlier. Her words were muffled, but the tone was sharp, agitated. I told you already my paperwork is being corrected. I submitted everything twice. It's not my fault your system lost my files. Another voice responded, firmer now, male. Ma'am, this is a secondary screening issue, not a criminal charge. You need to calm down. At that moment, Sophie dropped her pencil. Her body stiffened. She didn't move for a second. Then slowly, she lifted her head toward the door, as if drawn by some invisible thread. The woman's voice rose slightly, cracking under stress. You're not listening, my daughter. And before she could finish, Sophie whispered almost too soft to catch Mom. The word escaped her lips before she could reel it back. Rachel heard it. So did Shadow. The dog stood up, tail stiff, ears pivoted forward. Sophie blinked, then immediately ducked her head. "What did you say?" Rachel asked gently. Sophie shook her head, clutching the paper tighter. "Nothing. I didn't say anything. Sophie, do you know the woman they're talking to?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes," but her voice wavered. Rachel took a step closer. "It's okay if you do. No one's in trouble. We're just trying to understand what's happening." "I don't know her," Sophie insisted, but she kept her face down, hands shaking slightly. Rachel let the silence settle. Then she walked out of the room, closing the door behind her gently. Outside, Decker was waiting, arms crossed, watching the hallway. "You heard her," Rachel said. "She called the woman Mom." "Didn't even realize she said it." Decker nodded slowly. "Shadow knew before we did." Rachel exhaled. "She's been coached to stay quiet." But something about that voice, it broke through. Alvarez approached from the other end of the corridor, holding a tablet. "I just got results from the deeper scan on Martin Lang's ID. It's linked to a shell identity created through a short-lived guardianship claim in Colorado. The notary on the birth certificate, real person, but fired for malpractice 2 months ago." Rachel's eyebrows rose. "So the whole thing's built on paper scaffolding?" "Exactly. And the woman in holding her prints partially match a sealed case from 3 years ago involving a custody dispute and cross-border legal complications. The record's redacted, but there's enough to suggest a link." Rachel looked toward the interview room again. "That girl's real name may not even be Sophie. She called the woman Mom." Alvarez asked. "Yes," Rachel confirmed, accidentally. She heard her voice and it just came out. Alvarez exhaled. "She's not just a witness, then. She's family. And she's being coached to deny it." Decker frowned. If the woman in holding is her biological mother, what the hell happened to put them on separate paths? One in detention, one with falsified papers? Rachel shook her head. "We need more than gut feelings. We need something concrete." Just then, the hallway grew louder. The woman's voice echoed again, closer now. She was being moved. "I'm not lying to you. You have to listen. I'm not here illegally. My daughter is somewhere in this building. They took her." The shout broke through the otherwise sterile air like glass shattering on tile. Inside the interview room, Sophie flinched visibly. Her pencil dropped again. Her hands covered her ears, but she couldn't block it fast enough. Rachel burst through the door. "Sophie, look at me," she said, crouching beside her. "It's okay. You're safe here." But Sophie only shook her head, whispering to herself, "I'm not supposed to talk to her." "He said I shouldn't." Rachel's heart raced. "Who's he?" "I don't know," Sophie whispered. "The man who brought me." Her voice broke. "He said it would be better if I forgot her. He said she made mistakes." Rachel reached out, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. Shadow stepped forward, positioning himself between them and the door. "You don't have to lie anymore," Rachel said. "We're going to figure this out." Sophie nodded once, but didn't speak again. Outside, the shouting stopped, but the damage was done. The name Mom had escaped Sophie's lips, and with it the wall between the truth and whatever version had been constructed around her began to crack. Rachel stood slowly, her eyes locked on the girl's face. A face that didn't match her papers, but matched something far deeper. A truth just beginning to surface. Rachel hadn't even taken 2 steps away from the observation booth when the unexpected happened. Shadow, still stationed quietly at Sophie's feet, rose with sudden intention, his entire body snapping into focus. Not tense, not aggressive, but alert, with a sense of direction that needed no instruction. Rachel turned as she heard his claws click against the polished floor. "Shadow." Her voice came out more like a question than a command. He didn't respond. Without hesitation, he trotted through the door that hadn't fully latched behind her and entered the main corridor. "Decker," she called out instinctively, but the dog was already past her, his tail stiff nose forward, gait determined. It wasn't a bolt. It was something else. A movement filled with recognition, like he was tracking a memory, not a scent. Decker, having just returned from the other end of the hallway, froze at the sight. What the hell? Shadow. But the K9 didn't even look back. The officers exchanged a quick glance, and then Rachel was already moving. Shadow turned the corner of the operations hall and veered sharply toward the restricted access gate leading to the secondary detainment rooms, an area off-limits to all non-personnel unless authorized. "He's never done that," Decker muttered as they followed, quickening their pace. "He never breaks position, not even when provoked." "He's not being provoked," Rachel said, breath short. "He's being pulled." Shadow reached the frosted glass door of holding room B and stopped, his nose pressed against the lower edge, paws shifting. Then he did something that made every hair on Rachel's arms rise. He whined. Softly, at first, then again, louder. Not the whine of fear, not urgency, something between recognition and longing. Rachel waved her badge at the scanner and punched in her clearance code. The lock buzzed. The door opened an inch, and Shadow pushed through before she could say a word. Inside the room was quiet, save for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the scratch of pen on paper. The woman from earlier, Maya Thompson, or whoever she really was, sat hunched over a table, handcuffed but calm, filling out yet another form under the cold eye of an immigration officer. Her face was tired-lined not by age, but by sleeplessness and stress. When the door opened, she didn't look up. When Shadow stepped in, however, she did. The moment their eyes met, her pen froze. Shadow paused mid-step, then in a move that startled the officer inside, walked straight to her. "Ma'am, back away from the dog," the officer ordered, starting to rise. But Shadow ignored him. And so did the woman. Her expression changed from guarded weariness to something cracked, wide open, a tremor in the corner of her mouth, a soundless exhale. "Oh my God," she whispered more to herself than to anyone. Shadow closed the final distance between them and placed his head gently against her knee. It was not a command posture. It was not a trick or an alert. It was familiarity. He leaned in, eyes lifted, ears back, in a way Rachel hadn't seen since he'd been assigned to trauma support. The woman's eyes welled up. "You remember me," she murmured, tears now rolling down her cheeks. Her hands, cuffed together, reached down, awkwardly, fingers brushing the fur behind his ears. "I thought you were gone." "They said you weren't. I couldn't." Her voice fractured. The officer reached for his radio, eyes darting between Rachel and Decker. "I need a supervisor. Something's happening in room B." "Let him stay," Rachel said firmly. Stepping in, "Shadow's not dangerous. He's identifying." Identifying what the officer asked, confused. Not what Rachel said quietly. "Who?" The woman pressed her forehead gently against Shadow's head, closing her eyes. "His name was Oliver when I knew him, but I guess they renamed him." "When did you know him?" Rachel asked. 3 years ago, she whispered. "He was part of the trauma unit assigned to our safe house. He was meant to help the kids regulate. He stayed with us 6 weeks. My daughter." Her voice caught. She loved him. He used to sleep by her bed. "Your daughter," Rachel repeated, watching her. "Is she here now?" The woman didn't answer, but she didn't have to. Shadow's presence, his calm, his stillness was testimony enough. Rachel leaned forward. "She called you Mom earlier?" "She didn't mean to, but she did." The woman's lip trembled. "She's alive." Rachel nodded. "Yes, but she's terrified. She's been coached not to trust anyone. To forget you. She's not supposed to be here," the woman said, voice cracking. "She was supposed to be with me. They took her at the checkpoint. I begged them not to separate us, but the man he told them I forged the papers that I wasn't who I claimed to be. They didn't even check." "What man?" Rachel asked sharply. "The one who said he'd help us cross legally. He had contacts. He made me sign things I didn't understand. I thought he was helping." Rachel turned toward Decker. "Check the name Martin Lang against known smuggling fronts. And run Oliver Shadow's original case history. If this woman's telling the truth, there should be a record of him being assigned to child trauma support near the border 3 years ago." Shadow hadn't moved. He remained pressed against her, breathing slow, steady. Not agitated, not protective, just present. Decker nodded and stepped out. The room fell into silence again. Then, as if to punctuate the moment, Shadow gently lifted his paw and placed it on the woman's leg. Rachel had seen that gesture before. It wasn't training, it was memory. And somewhere in that memory, there was a little girl whose real name no one had asked yet. Rachel stood just outside holding room B, her arms crossed tight against her chest, eyes fixed on the security monitor while Shadow remained inside, resting his head in the lap of the woman whose identity was becoming more impossible to dismiss. The hallway bustled with low murmurs of radios and distant footsteps, but inside her head it was quiet, focused, calculating. Everything in her gut said this wasn't random, and now they needed to bring in someone who could help translate Shadow's behavior into something they could argue in a report. That person arrived 15 minutes later, a lean man in his 40s wearing a field-worn jacket with DoD K9 behavioral unit stitched beneath a fading logo. His name was Curtis Lee, former Air Force handler turned civilian consultant. He broke position, Curtis asked as Rachel briefed him. On his own, walked straight into the holding room, she said, handing him the incident report, then leaned into the detainee like he knew her. Not alert posture, not protection, something deeper. She identified him by name Oliver. Claimed he worked with her and her daughter in a trauma safe house 3 years ago. Curtis whistled low. That would explain it. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Explain what these dogs, especially ones like Shadow, aren't just trained to detect narcotics or explosives, he said, glancing toward the observation window. He came out of a psychological support program. The units we deployed post-Katrina and then along the southern border, they were trained to respond to hormone shifts. Elevated cortisol suppressed dopamine, adrenaline spikes. Shadow isn't just reacting to familiarity. He's responding to biochemical memory. You're saying he remembers how she smells? More than that, Curtis replied. He remembers how she feels. People under chronic stress, like survivors of domestic violence or displaced minors, emit a specific chemical pattern. Dogs like Shadow are wired to pick it up. But it's not just detection, it's relational. He's not just saying this person is stressed. He's saying this person is mine. Rachel let that settle for a moment. Could it explain why he reacted to the girl, too? Absolutely, Curtis nodded. If he spent time with the two of them together, he'd link their neurochemical signatures. It's associative learning. Think muscle memory, but for emotion. Rachel tapped the window. She said she and her daughter were separated at a checkpoint. The man who brought the girl had forged documents. Shadow's behavior might be the most credible proof of their relationship. Curtis leaned in slightly. That's why I'm here. His behavior patterns combined with biometric stress indicators in both subjects could back up their story. Can we document that formally? I can write a report, he said. But the real breakthrough will be in the footage. Rachel nodded and turned towards Decker, who had been reviewing camera archives for the past hour. Tell me you found something. I think so, he replied, pulling up a window on his tablet. I went back 2 days before today's arrival and ran a search across secondary terminal entries. There's a blind spot in the system, a feed that normally syncs to our main archive zone 12, near the auxiliary check-in gate that was opened last weekend for overflow traffic. The one we temporarily activated for migrant processing overflow exactly, Decker said. I ran a cross-check of facial frames. The system didn't tag anything initially because the girl's passport name didn't match, but when I used the raw facial scan from her interview today, he rotated the screen. This came up. Rachel leaned closer. The video, slightly grainy, showed a young girl in a hooded jacket identical to Sophie standing beside the woman now sitting in holding room B. A man, tall, with sharp features, stood nearby, speaking rapidly into a phone. The woman appeared tense. The girl was clutching a stuffed animal. Shadow appeared briefly in the far right of the frame, led by another handler through the checkpoint corridor. And in that fleeting second, the girl broke from the woman's side, reached out and touched the dog. A handler gently redirected her, but Shadow turned back, sniffed her hand, and wagged once. Timestamp, Rachel asked. 3 days ago, Decker confirmed. This feed was never ported to the Central Archive. The migration officer working that checkpoint didn't flag it. No record in her transit log, but the footage doesn't lie. Curtis let out a low whistle. And there's your memory trigger. The girl interacted with Shadow in a high-stress environment alongside her mother. The dog filed it away. When he saw her again without the mother, his brain went, "Something's missing." That's why he couldn't rest. Rachel stared at the paused frame, the girl's tiny fingers pressed gently to Shadow's muzzle, the woman beside her mid-sentence eyes darting toward the agent nearby. The whole image radiated tension disruption moments before a fracture. "We can use this," she said. "We can use all of it." Decker nodded. "I'm downloading the uncompressed copy now. We'll need to get clearance to use it officially." "What about the man?" Rachel asked. "The one in the video running facial recognition now," he said. "His ID didn't register through the initial logs, but we'll try visa and visitor databases. Might be operating under multiple identities." Rachel turned to Curtis. "What do you think Shadow's next move would be if he had one?" Curtis smiled faintly. "He's already made it. That dog is telling you everything you need. It's just a matter of whether the humans are willing to listen." Rachel looked again through the glass where Shadow remained near the woman, occasionally nudging her hand-ear's low tail still. There was no tension in his body, only recognition. He had done his part. Now it was their turn. Rachel barely had time to finish reviewing the uncompressed footage when a call crackled through her radio, urgent and clipped. "Unattended bag reported in Terminal B Carousel Hold Zone near Gate 12. Tag shows destination Denver matching Flight 226. Her breath caught. That was Sophie's flight. Rachel glanced at Decker, whose eyes narrowed instantly. Without speaking, they moved. The walk took less than 3 minutes. When they arrived, 2 TSA agents were already standing by the conveyor belt, where a dark navy duffel bag sat lopsided, its outer tag partially torn but still legible. Rachel leaned in. The airline barcode was faint but intact. Passenger S. Lang, Flight 226, transfer code B2. This was never loaded onto the plane, one agent noted. It got rerouted to temporary hold, probably due to timing mismatch. "And no one came back for it?" Rachel asked. "Not yet." "Open it," she instructed. With gloves already on, the officer unzipped the duffel. Inside was a neatly folded hoodie, a worn pair of girls' sneakers, and a large, zippered pouch made of canvas. No electronics, no toiletries, just clothes and something harder wedged flat beneath the garments. The officer reached in and pulled out a folder, the kind you buy at dollar stores, pastel blue with fading sparkles on the edges. It was closed with a rubber band. "This doesn't feel like contraband," he said, handing it to Rachel. She peeled the band back carefully and opened the folder. Inside were 3 sheets of construction paper folded in half to resemble greeting cards. Crayon marks, stickers, some glitter glue still dried in patches. The first card was addressed in shaky handwriting to Mom, "From your best girl." Rachel's hand stilled. She turned to the page. There was a drawing, simple but emotionally loaded. A stick-figure girl holding hands with a taller woman, both surrounded by hearts, and a small black dog that looked suspiciously like Shadow. Rachel glanced at Decker, who said nothing, but the tightening of his jaw spoke volumes. She turned to the next page. This one had a photograph taped to the center. It was slightly curled, printed on glossy paper. A young girl, Sophie no doubt, was smiling awkwardly in the crook of the same woman's arm. The woman looked tired but happy. Her hair was shorter untied. The photo was casual, personal, the kind of image that never makes it into official documents because it's too real, too honest. "That's her," Rachel said quietly. "That's the woman in holding room B." "No doubt." She flipped to the last page. There, in slightly neater handwriting, a short note had been written in pencil. "Mom, I hope they don't separate us again. I will try to be brave if they do. I remember what you said about closing my eyes and thinking of the beach. I miss you. I miss us. No signature, no date. Just that." Decker exhaled slowly. That bag was never supposed to be found, or it was supposed to follow her quietly, Rachel replied. If no one noticed, it would have arrived in Denver and been picked up anonymously. But whoever arranged this didn't count on the timing glitch, Decker said. Or on Shadow. Rachel nodded, her fingers resting gently on the edge of the folder. "Let's log the bag into custody and keep the chain of evidence clean. This is more than personal effects." This is testimonial. As they turned to leave, a baggage supervisor jogged up to them. Hey, before you go, there's something weird with the intake scan for this luggage. What kind of weird? Rachel asked. The timestamp. He held out a tablet. Bag was tagged at 9:08 a.m., which matches Lang's arrival. But the internal tag scan from the back room shows it crossed into carousel zone at 9:42. That's after the man who dropped Sophie off had already left, Decker said. Who moved it? The supervisor shrugged. No agent logged the transition. It bypassed the sorting belt. Rachel frowned. Someone physically carried this past the scanner. Looks that way. That's tampering, she muttered. And it means whoever's behind this had more than just fake IDs. They had access. They walked the evidence-bagged folder back toward the security suite in silence. Shadow met them at the hallway junction, tail low, eyes tracking Rachel's every step. He sniffed the edge of the duffel bag, then paused as his nose hovered near the corner seam. His tail wagged once. You know this bag, Rachel said softly. Shadow blinked slowly. She crouched and held the photo from inside up for him to see. You remember her? Shadow sat. Curtis reappeared, watching the scene unfold with a look of quiet confirmation. That, he said, is learned emotional imprinting. He doesn't need language, he has memory. We just need someone to listen to it, Rachel replied. Because she's already been trying to tell us the truth with crayons and stickers and broken handwriting. And now we have proof, Decker said. Physical, emotional, circumstantial. Which won't matter, Rachel added bitterly, if someone above decides to bury it. Curtis stepped forward. Then we don't let them. You document everything. You put it in duplicate offsite and you don't blink when they try to intimidate you. Rachel looked back at the duffel bag. The image of Sophie's letter haunted her. Not because of what it said, but because of how calmly it accepted the inevitable. A child too used to being separated. Too willing to be brave. Too prepared for heartbreak. Rachel sat across from Alvarez in the operations office. The walls around them cluttered with updates, flight rosters, and immigration logs, but all of it fading into the periphery as the files on the desk before them pulled every thread into focus. The duffel bag had changed everything. Not only did it confirm Sophie's connection to the woman in holding room B, it also cracked open a layer of bureaucratic dust that no one had bothered to question until now. Decker slid a manila folder across the desk. We found something in the DOJ internal case index. Took a while because the file was mislabeled under emergency family separation protocols instead of migration intake. Rachel opened it. Inside was a brief memorandum marked confidential bearing a header from the Office of Refugee Resettlement dated 16 months prior. The subject line read, Temporary Identity Provision, Minor Witness, Lang S. Rachel read aloud. In accordance with Witness Protection Protocol, under Section 287G Discretion Minor Subject, Lang Sophie, age 6, was temporarily reclassified under alias for the duration of legal proceedings regarding the Langridge transport case. Custody to be determined post-deposition, Langridge Alvarez asked. That was a human transport operation we cracked out of Tucson. Cartel front disguised as a private child sponsorship agency. Exactly, Decker said. Turns out Sophie, or whatever her real name is, was present during one of the interdictions. She was classified as an endangered minor. ORR gave her a new name and documentation to shield her from retaliation while the adults involved were processed. And the mother Rachel asked. Not listed anywhere in the transfer memo, Decker said, which makes no sense, especially now that we have photos, letters, and Shadow's behavior indicating the woman in our holding room is not just connected, but possibly her legal guardian. She was scrubbed, Alvarez muttered. Intentionally or by negligence doesn't matter, Rachel said, voice tight. The effect is the same. When she re-entered the system to reclaim her daughter, she was flagged as a non-match because no record remained tying her to the alias Sophie Lang. As far as the DHS portal is concerned, she's just a stranger making an unfounded claim. Curtis, who had been reviewing scanned documents nearby, walked over and placed another sheet on the table. This is the original intake form for the child dated the day she was brought in from Tucson. It includes a handwritten note referred by M. Thompson, maternal guardian. Custody status pending ID verification. Maya Thompson, Rachel murmured. It's her. But here's where it gets insane, Curtis continued. The intake note was never transcribed into the digital file. The contractor on duty marked the box for physical-only processing, which means it was never uploaded into the DOJ or OR shared database. So when she tried to claim custody, her name didn't match anything in the system. She wasn't erased, Rachel said bitterly. She was lost, buried under a system too broken to track its own humanity. Decker leaned in. The paper trail was there the whole time. They just never connected it. And now she's been sitting in detention as a supposed imposter while her child was sent forward under an alias no one bothered to reconcile. And Martin Lang, Alvarez asked. Still no confirmation, Decker said, but I pulled a list of contractors who worked with the shelter system around that time. One name came up as both driver and guardian proxy in 3 different cases, Marcus Lanning. Facial recognition matches our Martin Lang. Rachel's jaw clenched. So he was exploiting the custody lag to redirect minors, probably claiming legal authority under temporary shelter assignments, then vanishing. Which would explain why he dropped her off alone, Curtis added. He never planned to accompany her. Just move her like cargo and disappear. Rachel looked down at the picture Sophie had drawn, the one of her mother herself, and Shadow trapped inside a child's folded construction paper. The system had done more than separate a family. It had rewritten their names, misplaced their truth, and nearly criminalized a woman for daring to come back for her own child. We need to escalate this to federal oversight, she said, but quietly. If this kind of gap exists for one family, it exists for others. Agreed. Alvarez nodded. But be careful who you bring in. The people who built this mess won't want it exposed. Rachel stood folder in hand. First, I'm taking this to Child Services Liaison. They need to know that Sophie was never legally reassigned. She was put into a false identity without final custodial determination. That means she's still legally tethered to her mother. Good luck proving that without DNA or a signed custody decree, Decker said. We may have to push for emergency family reevaluation. Rachel looked back at the surveillance screen where Sophie sat quietly again, folding and unfolding the corner of her shirt. Her knees, tucked up body, coiled in that way only children who've learned to disappear can manage. And then she looked toward holding room B where the woman had stopped crying, stopped speaking, and now simply waited, still handcuffed her eyes, no longer pleading but resigned. Rachel knew that look. She'd seen it too many times on people who had done everything right and still lost. Rachel stared at the clearance log Decker had just printed out, the edges of the paper curling slightly in her grip as her eyes scanned the name highlighted in yellow ice, Agent Ronald P. Keller. He had processed Sophie's intake 16 months earlier during the Langridge transport bust. His signature was on the physical-only custody transfer memo, the one that had never been uploaded. His name was also on 2 other flagged cases involving minors assigned temporary identities without guardianship confirmation. Keller, Rachel said aloud, letting the name sink in. Still active, technically yes, Decker answered, but on administrative leave pending investigation. OPR opened an internal review 3 months ago. He's suspected of creating bottlenecks in case files to reduce his clearance backlog. One incident involved an 8-year-old boy who was reassigned under a false name without family notification. They found out 6 months later. And his defense, Rachel asked? Clerical error? Blamed system glitches? Claimed no malicious intent? Rachel let out a slow breath. Except it keeps happening to the most vulnerable families, the ones least able to fight back. I pulled Keller's field logs, Decker continued. He was also assigned to the temporary shelter where Sophie was sent registered as Lang S., under a provisional number instead of her actual identity. That's not negligence, Rachel said flatly. That's design. Agreed. He didn't misfile her. He buried her. Meanwhile, Curtis sat beside Shadow in the hallway, quietly watching the dog's posture. Shadow hadn't left his place near holding room B since their last visit. His ears twitched occasionally, but he remained steady grounded as if anchoring something invisible. Rachel stepped into the soft interview booth again where Sophie still waited, knees tucked into her chest. The girl looked up, uncertain. "Hi, Sophie," Rachel said gently, crouching beside her. "I wanted to ask you about something you said earlier about when you were taken to a different place. You said someone checked your teeth." Sophie nodded slowly. "Yeah, the man said it was part of the rules." "Do you remember where that was?" Sophie shook her head. "No signs or names. No, just a brown building. The windows had bars, but not scary ones. The kind that slide open." Rachel paused. "What about the person who checked your teeth? Do you remember their name?" "No," Sophie replied, "but he was really tall and wore 2 watches. 1 on each wrist." Rachel blinked. 2 watches. Sophie nodded. "He said he was from somewhere else and couldn't remember the time zones." Decker, standing outside the glass, made a quick motion. Rachel excused herself and stepped into the hallway. "We may have something," Decker said, already dialing. "There's a pediatric dental volunteer named Victor Esteban listed on the intake rotation at one of the shelters Keller oversaw. He's an NGO contractor but known to wear dual watches, one synced to Colombia, the other to Arizona. It's in his volunteer bio. That shelter, Rachel said, does it have a brown facade and sliding window bars? Bingo." Decker handed over a tablet. Location El Paso near the old freight yard. OR Site C. Was Sophie registered there, not under her alias? But he tapped, opening a file. There was a child listed only as SL, female, age estimated 6. 7, no parent present. Intake done by Keller. No medical updates, no exit form, just a closed file marked transferred under supervision. Which matches the timing of the flight manifest for her arrival here, Rachel said. So she wasn't just overlooked, she was shuffled deliberately. And without proper debrief or reunification review, Decker added. That's what ICE is supposed to verify, whether the person claiming a child has the right to. But Keller bypassed all of it. So when Maya, her real mother, came to find her, Rachel concluded the system had no link. She was flagged as a false claimant, exactly, because there was no living file to compare against. Alvarez joined them holding a printout. DOJ just confirmed. The signature used on the notary stamp in Sophie's current birth certificate matches one used on 2 other cases under review for document fraud. Guess who signed them? Rachel didn't need to ask. Keller. Alvarez nodded. We have enough to request a federal review of this child's identity suppression. But it's going to get ugly. If Keller's fingerprints are on this, he wasn't acting alone. Doesn't matter, Rachel said. Right now, we need to clear Maya and reunite her with her daughter before anyone else buries more evidence. Curtis stood watching them from across the hall. What are the chances you get approval before someone higher up pulls jurisdiction? Rachel exhaled. Slim. But we're not waiting. She looked down the hallway where Sophie remained. And then she glanced toward holding room B. We bring them together, under observation. With Shadow present, let the dog and the kid do what the system failed to. You sure about that? Decker asked. Absolutely, Rachel said. Because it's the one place where everyone else's lies will fall apart. Curtis smiled faintly. Sometimes the dog knows before the paperwork does. Rachel turned back, gripping the file tighter. In a world where names had been swapped and voices ignored, a detail as small as a dentist's twin watches had just exposed the map of a child's lost path home. Rachel stood in the dimly lit archive room beneath Terminal D, where older paper files and off-grid case records were still kept in sealed bins. Decker had just returned from ORR Site C in El Paso with scanned copies of medical logs taken from hard drives disconnected after the shelter's transition to a new system. This, he said, holding out the printout, is the dental profile logged for patient SL, age 7, examined 6 months ago at Site C, filed by Dr. Victor Esteban, the dual-watch dentist. Now, compare this with the dental scan taken during Sophie's intake here last week. Rachel took both and aligned them. Molar positioning, previous fillings, and bite curvature identical. Same kid, she said. Confirmed. Which wouldn't be surprising, Decker added, if it weren't for this. He passed her a third sheet, an older patient profile from a mobile clinic operating under a non-profit license, Hope Pediatrics. The name listed was Maya Thompson, with a dependent patient child listed as Sophia T. Thompson, age 4 at the time seen for a joint appointment. "Where did you get this?" Rachel asked. "They're not even in the government registry." "They weren't supposed to be," Decker replied. Hope Pediatrics operates privately, but they offered pro bono services to migrants under a legal partnership with ICE. Dr. Nadine Hall ran it for 3 years. She kept copies of every chart in a private archive after the ICE contract ended. "And it shows Maya and Sophie together, not just together," he said. "Listed under the same case ID. Same address, same medical guardian signature." Rachel let out a slow breath. "So the evidence has existed this entire time. The system just chose not to see it." Curtis appeared at the door, his expression unreadable. "I just got off the phone with Dr. Hall. She remembers them." Personally, Rachel asked. Very clearly, Curtis said. She said the little girl was terrified if needles wouldn't even sit unless her mother held her hand. Maya explained that they'd been traveling for days. Hall offered them food, let the girl color in her office. But when Hall asked to follow up with a second appointment, someone from ICE called and told her not to document the visit in the federal logs. And she obeyed. She didn't delete her internal record, Curtis clarified. She just didn't sync it to the ICE database. Rachel looked at the names again, her fingers curling around the documents. This isn't just a case of clerical oversight. It's obstruction. Keller and whoever worked with him deliberately separated parent and child, then erased any record tying them together. Because if you break the chain, Decker said, you can reroute the custody, reassign the child. It's easier to traffic someone who's undocumented, unlinked. And that would explain why Maya was flagged as a false claimant, Rachel added. Because the system couldn't find a link it had intentionally hidden. Curtis folded his arms. Dr. Hall said she's willing to testify. She'll go on record. Says she kept a copy of the intake form with both names on it. We'll need that, Rachel said. Chain of custody timestamps and her original clinic logbook. That will stand in federal review. Shadow paced slowly near the booth where Sophie now sat coloring again, unaware of the mounting storm building around her story. Every few moments he paused, ears swiveling toward the corridor. He sensed something. Maybe anticipation. Maybe change. "We need to move," Rachel said. "Take all of this dental matches, pediatric confirmation physical evidence, and build the reunification case now, before someone tries to disappear either of them again." Decker was already scanning the files into an encrypted cloud folder. Uploading duplicates, secure channel, sending to DOJ oversight and child welfare liaison. If we're lucky, someone in the review unit will act before jurisdiction shifts again. And what if they don't? Curtis asked. Then we don't wait, Rachel answered. We take it public. Let the system explain how it misfiled a mother and nearly erased a daughter. As she turned to leave, Shadow abruptly stood and walked back toward the corridor, no urgency but with focus. The moment Rachel stepped into the hallway, she saw Alvarez waiting. "We've got a problem," he said. "Keller's been tipped off. He left his apartment 30 minutes ago, no phone signal, no credit card use. He knows we're on to him, and he may try to silence the last link in this chain, Maya." Rachel didn't speak. She just moved fast. Down the hall past the soft room toward holding room B, where Maya still sat exhausted but awake, eyes locked on the floor. As the door opened, she looked up, and in her gaze Rachel saw more than recognition. She saw someone who'd been silent so many times she'd learned not to hope. "We found it," Rachel said quietly. "Your daughter's dental file. It matches the one from El Paso. And Dr. Hall confirmed the joint visit. You were never lying." Maya didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I didn't make her up." Rachel stepped closer. "We're not going to let them take her again, not this time." Maya opened her eyes. "Then please, let me see her." Rachel nodded slowly. One step at a time, but in her heart she knew the time had come. Truth was no longer hidden. It just needed the right place to stand. Rachel stood in the central briefing room, eyes fixed on the monitor where the Department of Homeland Security's Internal Affairs Division had just issued a formal update. The message was short, clinical, and precise. After full review of custody documentation, ICE intake procedure, and ORR records, it is determined that Maya Thompson is the legal mother of minor subject previously classified as Sophie Lang. Separation protocol was conducted in violation of federal reunification standards. Immediate corrective action required. A second line followed one that made Rachel exhale for the first time in hours. Reunification approved under direct supervision. No further delay authorized. Less than 20 minutes later, in a room prepared on the east side of the airport's security wing, Maya stood near the window, hands trembling not from fear anymore, but from the weight of finally being believed. Rachel walked in first, nodded, then stepped aside. Sophie entered slowly, her hand in Curtis's still gripping the photo she had drawn days earlier. When she saw her mother, her fingers loosened and the picture floated to the floor unnoticed. Mom Sophie's voice cracked. Maya knelt arms wide, and the little girl ran forward, colliding into her chest with the full force of everything she'd held in since they were taken apart. Neither spoke at first. The hug was enough. The way Maya rocked her gently, her eyes closed, her cheek pressed against her daughter's hair, no words could have added to that truth. After 9 hours, they were no longer names in a file or mismatched identities in a flawed system. They were mother and daughter human again. Rachel turned away slightly, blinking harder than usual. Decker stood nearby, arms folded, a quiet grin tugging at the edge of his mouth. "That's the part they don't show in reports," he said. "And probably never will," Rachel replied. "But it's the only part that matters." Later that evening, as paperwork processed and final signatures were logged, a separate meeting was held regarding Shadow. Despite everything he had revealed, despite being the catalyst for the truth, the department noted operational anomalies in his conduct. Deviation from position without command, one report said. Emotional imprint affecting field neutrality, another added. It was technically not a punishment, but a decision was made. Shadow would be retired early, effective immediately. He would not return to service, not because he failed, but because he had proven himself too empathetic for protocol. Curtis delivered the news with gentle honesty. "They're not calling it a reprimand," he said to Rachel, "but they can't risk a K9 who acts on instinct over order, even if he was right." Rachel looked down at Shadow, who sat beside her, calm and quiet eyes scanning the room as if still guarding something important. "So, what happens to him?" she asked. "They offered me first adoption rights," Curtis replied, "but I already said no." "Why?" "Because he already picked someone else," Curtis said, stepping aside. At the end of the hallway, Maya and Sophie stood waiting, the girl holding out her hand shyly. "Would he want to come with us?" Sophie asked. "He already did," Rachel said. And just like that, Shadow trotted forward, tail low but wagging, as if no command was needed, only permission. Maya crouched to pet him, her fingers brushing behind his ears. "He never forgot," she whispered. "Neither did she," Rachel added. 2 days later, after final clearances, the trio walked out of the airport, Maya, Sophie, and Shadow side by side. No suitcases, no handlers, no escort. Just freedom. The kind earned not in grand courtrooms, but in small truths uncovered by instinct memory and a child's crayon letter. An internal memo circulated quietly afterward. Keller's actions triggered not only his suspension, but also a wider audit into identity shielding errors across multiple ICE-managed shelters. Maya's case would be cited in future training modules not as a failure, but as a reminder of what happens when someone listens, really listens, not to a file or a policy, but to the people at the center of it. Months passed. Rachel kept the folder in her drawer not because she needed to remember, but because it reminded her why the job mattered. She received a card once. It had no return address. Just a crayon drawing a dog, a girl, and a woman on a beach with the words written in neat, familiar handwriting. "Thank you for letting us stay together. Love, Sophie," that was all. But it was enough. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing so we can keep sharing real human moments that deserve to be heard. What part of the story struck you the most? And by the way, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.